All right, hello everyone, welcome. Good evening. So I'm Jessica Robinson, and I am the Education Program Manager for the Savannah Institute, and I'm really excited to be coordinating these nutshell discussions. They're always really exciting. And so for those of you who are new to the Savannah Institute is a nonprofit organization that works in collaboration with farmers and scientists to develop perennial food and fodder crops within diverse multifunctional systems grounded in ecology and inspired by the savanna biome. And so I'm really excited to introduce our speaker for tonight. Ken Mudge is a professor emeritus at the Department of Horticulture at Cornell University and is the co-author of the book Farming the Woods, an Integrated Permaculture Approach to Growing Food and Medicinals and Temperate Forests. And so in his talk, Forest Cultivation of Shiitake and Other Edible and Medicinal Mushrooms, Ken will discuss the log acquisition and inoculation, that's a mouthful, with fungal spawn, incubation, fruiting, and harvest of edible and medicinal mushrooms.
Okay, folks, I'm really anxious to go on this. My name is Ken Mudge, as Jess said. I've been involved in forest farming for 15 or so years, teaching and doing. As you can see on this first slide, oh, by the way, I wanted to mention, Jess indicated that the title of this talk is Forest Cultivation of Shiitake and Other Edible and Medicinal Mushrooms. I would like to add a short piece on medicinal herbs as well, because diversity is the name of the game in terms of forest farming. In the first slide here, you can see the standard definition. Yeah, you can see the standard definition of forest farming, which is cultivation of non-timber forest crops beneath the canopy of an established forest. But in the lower left is another definition by my graduate student, Jean Grace. She really stresses the ecological aspects. Non-timber forest crops are cultivated in the unique microclimate created by a forest canopy. And you have to learn about that microclimate, how to manipulate it and manage it. You can see on the diagonal here, there are a range of different sorts of crops, non-timber forest products or crops that you can grow in a forest farming situation. It kind of looks like a lot, but keep in mind that you can grow far more various crops in full sun than you can in shade. The selections here for forest farming have to be shade-tolerant plants and shade-tolerant mushrooms. So we're talking about medicinals, starting from the upper left, mushrooms, those are shiitake, nuts like the hickory nut here. These fruits are the pawpaws, wonderful fruit, and ornamentals are an exciting new area in forest farming, a really good opportunity to make some money. I'm going to go to the next slide. It's not going anywhere. Oh dear. Jess, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
I seem to be frozen up. I can't minimize this page. I can't move it. I don't know what's going on.
Okay, maybe give it a couple minutes. If not,
sure.
I can try pulling it up and we can go from there, because it might be just too much for your computer to handle, and sometimes there's a lag.
All right. Well, at least I got that far.
Yeah.
Let me go back where I was and see if I can move that now. Yes. Okay. With all those different crops, my colleague Steve Gabriel and I'm the one in the top there with the red jacket. We took a broad look at what's available in terms of resources and pretty much concluded that there is no single book that really covers all the aspects of forest farming, so we wrote this one, Farming the Woods. I'm not here to promote the book, but it is available through Amazon and other sources. I'll just leave it at that. Now, when I'm approached, folks will come up to me and they'll say, "Oh, please tell me how to grow ginseng." And the reason one of the reasons they do that is it's fantastically valuable. It'll sell for $600 to $1,000 a pound. So why bother to grow shiitake mushrooms, which are only $10 to $15 a pound? The reason is that the ginseng will take 8 to 10 years to mature. The shiitake will start producing mushrooms in only 1 year, and it'll continue to produce for 3 or 4 years, and you can really keep that log going for a long period of time. But once you harvest ginseng, it's gone. It's not going to come back or re-sprout. And one other thing a ding against ginseng is that it's so valuable that poaching is a serious problem. You have to be ready to deal with that. So what I usually recommend to a beginner is go ahead and plant some ginseng, but at the same time you might want to inoculate some logs in order to get some income early on before you start getting rich on ginseng. Now, the date in the lower left corner is completely wrong. I'm sorry about that. This is just an example of some of the mushrooms that we can cultivate in the forest. Of course, the shiitake is in the upper left, oyster mushrooms in the upper right. The next in the lower left is lion's mane. And lion's mane is a really neat fungus. It doesn't look like a mushroom at all. It looks like a bunch of little white icicles. It tastes fantastic, and I think it has real economic potential, but there is not much of a market for it yet. On the lower right is Stropharia, winecap Stropharia. And it's not grown on logs like the others. It is grown on wood chip beds. Now, shiitake can be grown two ways. Outdoors, log-grown shiitake, which is what we're going to talk about today. And you can see the price, $10 to $16 a pound. But go to the grocery store, and what you have are indoor-grown shiitake, grown in just like similar to the button mushrooms that are grown in such vast quantities. These shiitake in the grocery store here look like shoe leather, and I don't find them very appealing compared to the beautiful shiitake on the left. The price is less, but lots of people are willing to pay the extra for the quality that you find on log-grown shiitake. How do you get your mushrooms? You can go to the market, farmer's market, grocery store, whatever, and the upper left are button mushrooms, pizza mushrooms that are grown in vast quantities. In the middle are morels. Now, you can find these in some grocery stores, but they haven't been cultivated on logs. They've been grown in the wild. And in the Northwest, there's big interest in collecting wild mushrooms for shipment all over the country. And then, of course, shiitake on the right. Moving down, we have wild mushrooms. You can collect oyster mushrooms out in the woods, sulfur shelf, or chicken of the woods. And on the far right, maitake, otherwise known as hen of the woods. They're both beautiful fungi and a delight to eat. And then we come to the focus of this talk, really, is growing mushrooms. Shiitake on logs there, oysters are on logs as well. And the lion's mane that I was talking about is in the lower right. And you can see that it's not on a log laid horizontally like the others, but it's stacked up in a configuration that we call a totem stack. We'll get into that as well. All right, I like to separate mushroom cultivation into 5 steps or stages. The first one is substrate acquisition. Now that's a fancy university term for cutting down trees with a saw. And it's not really as simple as that. You got to know how to operate a chainsaw safely, of course. But not only are you going to go around cutting down trees, you have to know something about them. They have to be live. They have to be dormant, cut when they're dormant, which can mean any time through the winter and early spring. And depending on the mushroom that you want to grow, that dictates what species of trees that you can use. Shiitake, for example, can be grown on a wide range of hardwoods. Oak is sort of the gold standard. Sugar maple is really good. We find beech is a very acceptable substrate. And oyster mushrooms are kind of restricted to soft hardwoods like poplar, tulip poplar. That's why you can grow it on cellulose in large plastic bags, because it's a great source of cellulose, as are poplar and tulip poplar. The lion's mane grows particularly well on beech and sugar maple, and the stropharia, as I said, is grown on the ground in wood chip beds. The lower line there shows you various different configurations that are best suited for the different mushroom species, and I'll be showing you each of them: bolts, totems for the lion's mane as well, and chip beds. Now there's Nick there is using his chainsaw to cut down those trees, as I say, during the dormant period, winter or spring. Although it's possible to cultivate mushrooms in the summer or fall. It's just a slightly different approach. As I said, tree species is very important depending on which mushroom you're working with. We did an experiment, for example, where we compared red oak, aspen, beech, and red maple. And red oak works well. Beech works especially well. It actually outperformed the red oak in this experiment. Aspen, nothing. I mean, we didn't get a single mushroom. And then red maple, it's hard to cultivate mushrooms. If you know what you're doing, you can cultivate mushrooms, shiitake on red maple, but you have to avoid the bark peeling and some other parameters. The second stage is inoculation, and that simply means bringing the fungus to the substrate. The way you do that, the fungus that you bring to the log is called spawn, and it's produced in under sterile laboratory conditions. It's grown on sawdust, and you can see all that white material. That's the fungal mycelium. In the lower left is grain spawn, or basically rye grain or wheat grain can be grown in the presence of the mycelium, and the grain will be completely saturated with the fungus. And on the lower right, that's a plug culture. It's a little dowel, a short dowel about an inch and a quarter long, that's been grown in the presence of the fungal mycelium. And then you drill a hole, you hammer that thing in, and away you go. It's simple, but slow. Here's the procedure that we like to use, and really it's the best way to go for beginners as well as more experienced people. Let's start at the left of that table. Step one, you see two kinds of drills: a typical shop drill and an angle grinder. Now, I'm not trying to imply that you have the shop drill in one hand and the angle grinder in the other, and you start popping them two at a time. I'm just trying to imply that those are two choices that you could make. The shop drill, if you're just getting started out, you may have a Black & Decker drill or something like that in your basement, and you can start out that way. But the angle grinder is amazing. I mean, it goes at least 3 times as fast. You can save a tremendous amount of time, and if you're inoculating 100 logs, that's important. You see that the shop drill runs at about 2,500 RPM. The angle grinder runs at 10,000 RPM. That's how you get the time savings. Okay, so you move that log down the table, so to speak, and you can see the plastic bag there. That's the spawn that I talked about earlier. The tool there is designed, it's sort of like a big syringe or something, and you take it and you jam it into the bag of spawn, and that picks up a plug of inoculum, sawdust inoculum, and then you put it over the hole and you push that plunger down, and that shoves the inoculum into the hole. And you do that about 30 times per log. The final step 3 here is waxing. You wax each hole individually. Some people wax the ends, but we've found that isn't really necessary. The purpose of waxing is to avoid drying, for one thing, and to avoid the entrance of competing fungi. Here's that dowel method that I was referring to. In the upper right, we're using a specialized drill bit. These are 7/16 inch diameter drill bits. You can use, one that you got at Home Depot, or you can buy one of these specialized bits, which is adapted to these really fast drills, and it's got a stop built in to keep you from going too deep. The hole should be about 1 1/4 inches deep. Then you put a wooden plug in each one of those spawn holes, and you just tap it in with a hammer. The hammer's cheaper than that special inoculation tool, and if you're just getting started on a reasonable number, a low number of logs, this would be perfectly fine. And you have to wax it too, as I showed earlier slide. Now here's a really important aspect of cultivating shiitake mushrooms: strain. I've been talking about spawn. That's the stuff, the sawdust that you put into the hole. But strain basically is what variety or clone, essentially, of the shiitake fungus. This is all shiitake, but these are different strains that have been selected for different purposes. First of all, all the strains are divided into 3 broad temperature range. There's the wide range, warm weather, and cool weather. It's really important to understand this because if you're growing shiitake mushrooms in Alabama and it never gets cool, then you don't want to use cool weather strains. But if you're growing up in the cooler parts of the country, you have an opportunity to use the cool weather strains in the spring and in the fall, and to use the warmer weather strains in between. This happens to be a picture that was taken out of the Field and Forest Products catalog. And they have a really impressive range of strains and other things as well. Now here's what I was just referring to. You have typically with the warm weather and wide range strains, that is the yellow over through the brown, those are grown when the temperatures are elevated: May, June, July, August, September, maybe a little bit into October. But the blue on each end represent the cool weather strains, and you can see that if you just did the warm weather strains, then you're going to have 5 months worth of production. But if you add on the cool weather strains at both ends of the scale, then you're going to get another 4 months on top of that. So by understanding and using the strains judiciously, you can get a lot of benefit. All right, next step, colonization in the laying yard, otherwise known as spawn run. That's in that box there. And basically what it involves is you have plugged those holes with the fungal mycelium. It has to grow out into the log, into the wood of the log. And what it's doing is decomposing or digesting the wood. That's how it gets its nutrition, and that's how you get the mushrooms. So the colonization period for shiitake is usually about 1 year. It can be a little less, a little more. And basically you set them outdoors in a laying yard. It's called that because that's where you lay your logs. And these are going to sit for about a year. Now you may have other stacks that have been inoculated sooner and they're into production and so forth, but you work out a schedule so you're going to get new logs every year. The features of a good laying yard. Shade is the most important thing you can imagine because it minimizes moisture loss, and that's moisture loss. Drying out of the log is the single most reason for lack of success in shiitake cultivation. So you want shade, you want good shade, and you can see in this situation, I don't know if you can recognize the trees, but these are hemlock, which cast a very dense shade in forest, and they cast shade year-round. On the other hand, if your laying yard is under oak or maple or one of the hardwoods, one of the deciduous hardwoods, that's fine during the summertime, but in the fall, of course, it's going to defoliate, and you've got these big gaps in the branches, and the sun is going to stream on in. And winter sun can result in drying of the log. There's no doubt about it. So shade is of ultimate importance. The slope, that's just a convenience, so you don't have to walk up and down the hills carrying the logs. A relatively flat spot is good. And then water. Access to water is extraordinarily important just to keep the logs from drying out, but not only that. You can use that water to force the mushrooms to come out on schedule, and so that's essential to supplying your buyer. And finally, access. That's you and your tractor or your pickup or whatever. It has to be a place where you can get to, because you don't want to carry those logs very far. Now, here are the different substrate configurations I mentioned a ways back. The most common one are bolts, or in other words, sections of log in the upper right. They're arranged here in a totem stack. I'm sorry, not a totem stack. A crib stack. And they're sort of like a log cabin in that configuration. It is very efficient in terms of space. It has a very small footprint, and so you can get a lot of logs in a limited amount of space. The totem system, where you're just stacking up logs and you're inoculating with the fungal mycelium in between the different logs. And for whatever reason, that works better for lion's mane and a few other mushrooms than the bolts do. But the bolts usually the method of choice for shiitake. Wood chips, of course, in the case of the wine cap stropharia. And stump culture, that's a little different. Let's say you've got a tree that's in the wrong place, still alive. You cut it down a foot off the ground or maybe 6 feet off the ground, leave it there on its own roots, and go ahead and inoculate it. Those roots, even though they're going to die, are going to funnel moisture up into the trunk, and in a year or so, your stump culture will start producing mushrooms, in this case oyster mushrooms. As I said, the primary concern, more important than anything else you could learn tonight, I think, is to avoid drying. Drying of the log is caused by wind, sunlight more than anything else, low humidity, and bark integrity. The low humidity, if you recall the crib stack, the sort of log cabin stack, well, that actually maintains a higher humidity than if the logs were just out in the open. Bark integrity. You may remember I said that red maple was hard to grow mushrooms. That's because when you cut it fresh in the spring, the bark comes off very, very easily, and you have to know how to keep it from peeling off. But if it does peel off, moisture is going to be lost through evaporation from that bare wood very, very rapidly. The little diagram here shows different sources of moisture input and loss. Excuse me. Evaporation is the major source, rain loss, rain major source of uptake. But the interesting thing here, when the fungus digests the wood, that chemical process generates water. And so as the wood is being decomposed, it's actually adding water to the system. So you have to find a balance between all these different factors. Now, how to stop that drying? First of all, irrigate if it's necessary. If your log is just getting too dry, you have to get out with the soaking tank or the sprinkler. Windbreaks, you're not going to plant a bunch of small trees and wait till they grow up to windbreak size. That way you wouldn't get any mushrooms for a long, long time. So you need to find a site that has natural windbreaks or topography that minimizes wind-blown. Shade, I've already emphasized that. You can't do better than a hemlock canopy. The crib stack, that's another name for it, retains moisture, humidity, and the bark gloss. All right, now let's look at the next stage in the process, and that is fruiting. With mushrooms like the lion's mane in the upper right and the oyster in the lower left, those will fruit whenever they want to produce mushrooms. You can't do anything about it. If you have an appointment with the restaurant to supply mushrooms on Saturday and you don't get them, you get them on Tuesday and they're not fresh on Saturday, it's difficult to supply. On the other hand, with shiitake, one of the great things about this mushroom is you can make it fruit whenever you want. And that way gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of meeting your goals in terms of supplying and everything. Here's how you do it. We call it forced fruiting or shocking. You get a tank of water as cold as you can. Sometimes you might work with a 200-gallon cattle trough or whatever. You place those logs that you see in the background. They're not producing any mushrooms right now, but they're about a year old or so. You put them in the cold tank, and Julie there is forcing them down with that wooden slat there. You leave it there anywhere from overnight to 24 hours. And then you bring them out and you stack them up in this particular teepee-like configuration. And within a week to 10 days, depending on the temperature, they'll just pop right out of there. And if you know how long it's going to take, you can plan ahead, and you get the flush like that. You can harvest it the morning of the restaurant run or whenever. Now, one reason, we started out, I emphasized the crib stack, the log cabin configuration. Once you've soaked them and flushed them, as it's called, you don't want to put them in the log cabin configuration when the mushrooms are coming, because it would be terribly difficult to pick them. You'd have to dive in there, and it would be a difficult thing to do. So when you put them in this configuration, they're very easy to pick, and you can get the ones in back and so forth. So it's a good system as far as fruiting your mushrooms is concerned. Here's my friend Steve up in the upper right. He's more of a huckleberry fin type. He builds these rafts in his stream and pegs them down so they won't float away, and he finds that a very efficient way to do it. He also likes to get his feet wet. And actually, when I went there one time, he set these concrete blocks in the stream just so I could walk across, and I started walking across and I fell right into the stream. So something to be avoided. Now here, how do you know when your log is ready to be forced? It's not based on the calendar. Okay, 1 year is up, let's force them. It's more complex than that. You have to know when the log is ready. This is one method you can tell. Each one of those white spots corresponds to a row of holes. And what happens is the fungus begins to grow through the log and comes right out to the end of the log and leaves these white patches, each one corresponding to a row. And when you see that, you know it's a good time to begin forcing. Overwintering is an important consideration. As I mentioned on our hemlock laying yard, we have perfect shade all winter long, all summer long, and that's an advantage to using an evergreen. But in the case of a deciduous laying yard, maples or whatever, we use black cloth, greenhouse shade cloth actually, to cover the pile. And we would actually now take that bolt of cloth and bring it down and cover the entire pile, and that will sort of mimic the shade from the hemlock. This is a woven shade cloth material. It's not entirely expensive. It's not inexpensive. Okay, here are a couple of friends of mine, Steve and Julie. They run a farm out in the western part of New York State, and they have grass-fed beef. They have eggs, and they have mushrooms mostly. But you know, they're busy with the operation, with the farm all day long. And so what they do in their basement, they've set up a couple of refrigerators where they keep the mushrooms and the eggs. Other commodities they can leave out on the shelf. People take what they want and put the money in the bag. At least most of them do. As far as marketing at a farmer's market is concerned, this is the farmer's market in San Francisco, and I've never seen such a diverse collection of mushrooms. Some of them are cultivated like shiitake and oyster and so forth, but many of them are collected from the wild. Here on the far left, you can see some value-added products. Consider drying mushrooms. If you've, on a given day, you've just produced too many, you produce 20 pounds instead of 10, the other 10 pounds will go bad very quickly within less than a week. So if you can dry them, sun dry them, that will allow you to keep them for years, actually. You can sell them to folks that want to use them in soups and so forth, and it's a very efficient way to use them. As I understand it, in Japan, they eat a lot of shiitake mushrooms, and mostly they're dry mushrooms. Some chefs will say they are better for cooking than wet mushrooms. An interesting thing about drying mushrooms: if you have a sun dryer, and if you take your mushroom caps and turn them upside down, so the cap is on the bottom and the stalk or the stipe is going up, the sunlight will strike the ribs and the gills, and that will cause a chemical reaction that increases the amount of vitamin D by many-fold. It greatly increases the amount of vitamin D, and so it's making a more healthful mushroom. Oh yeah, well shiitake mushrooms don't have too many pests. Deer don't eat them. Raccoons don't eat them. The only serious pests they have really are slugs, and I don't know about you, but some people find slugs rather disgusting, particularly when they can eat up a whole row of oyster mushrooms or shiitake mushrooms in a single night. A friend of mine who is an artist, he drew this little thing on the upper right And you can see there, I don't know if you can see it very clearly, but you can see a duck in the background near the stack of mushrooms. Turns out that the ducks love mushrooms. I'm sorry, the ducks love slugs, and they'll eat them right up. And so Steve, my colleague, decided to try this out. He got a small flock of 10 or so ducks. You can see them in the lower left along with their a goose, one goose with each group of ducks. And they would go in there and they would pick off all the slugs, but at the same time they would poop on the mushrooms, and that's not acceptable. So what Steve did was he put the logs inside of one wire, one fence, flexible fence, and the logs were there, and then he put another concentric ring around the first ring, so you had sort of a runway, and he put the ducks and the geese in the runway there, so they couldn't get at the mushrooms per se. And I guess what happened, it was highly successful, and basically I guess these slugs can smell the mushrooms, so they start coming across and on their way to the mushroom patch, but in the meantime the ducks are getting their fill. So it's kind of a clever way to do it. There are many other methods alleged to counteract slugs, but none of them work very well. Steve's is the best method I've seen. And I did have some other slides. Just go through them quickly, but this is lion's mane on a totem stack of sugar maple. Here are oysters on a totem stack. We have compared both lion's mane and oysters, both on the bolts, the logs, the 3-foot logs, versus the totem section. And for both of these fungi, we find that they perform better on the totems than they do on the logs, on the bolts as they're called. And that's true for both of them. Whereas Shiitake is almost exclusively on bolts. Here is an example of that that live tree that has been cut back and kept on its roots. You can see these wedges. He's used a chainsaw to cut these wedges. You take out the wedge, you pack it full of spawn and put the wedge back in, perhaps with a nail, and you wait some period of time, and you start getting these happen to be oyster mushrooms, golden oyster mushrooms, in vast quantities. And Rodney told me that he grossed $300 over 5 years from this one tulip poplar stump. And that's pretty good. So it's creative, and lots of folks, will try different things and get different outcomes. Winecap stropharia, I mentioned before, that's Bob Beifus in the upper right. He's, well, I usually call him Mr. Ginseng, and I'll mention it later in the medicinals talk. But he has inoculated a bed there at the Arnott Forest with the stropharia winecap, and you can see it in the lower right. If they're allowed to grow, they'll get really, really big. That's about the size of a dinner plate. You wouldn't want to eat it. It's not firm anymore and so forth, but you would be much better off to harvest it and sell it when it's about the lower right, 4 inches or so in diameter. And, okay. Now I'm ready to go to the medicinals. Blow that up to full size. All right. There are lots of people interested in wild herbs, in medicinal herbs for medicinal or other purposes. I don't really get into the medicinal properties of these things I'm not an herbalist, and I'm not really qualified, I think, to go into that. But what you see here, for example, is American ginseng, starting in the upper left, fairy wand in the middle, black cohosh on the bottom row, blue cohosh, Virginia snakeroot, and goldenseal. There are only a couple of these that are really profitable in a forest farming situation. Now here are ways that you can do it. Wildcrafting just refers to harvesting mushrooms or herbs in the wild, and that's one of the biggest ways that ginseng is harvested every year. There's a big stack of American ginseng, and it's worth hundreds of dollars when you're selling it at $400 to $600 a pound. Of course, you can grow ginseng and harvest the root. As I mentioned, that's going to take a year, and it's not quite as valuable as the wild stuff. Now, that's my cat making noise. Some nurseries will specialize in planting stock. They're not growing plants to full size to harvest the root or whatever and sell that way. Instead, they're growing seedlings or seeds or materials that others can use for planting their garden. And then medicinal ornamentals. I think one way to make money off of some of these ornamentals that aren't very, some of these medicinals that aren't very valuable as herbs that you sell to an herbal buyer, but rather they're beautiful. And I mean, you can see that right here, the black cohosh, the fairy wand. Some nurseries, some florist nurseries are growing these species not for sale as medicinals, but for sale as ornamentals. Something that a perennial gardener would love to buy. Whoops. I'm going to pass that by. Okay, here we go. With American ginseng, it's interesting that the price that you can get selling it to a buyer is sort of inversely proportional to how intensively you have to manage it. If you're collecting from the wild, your intensity is relatively low. You just have to walk around in the woods and know where you're going. And yet, you can get 600, and this last year it was more than $1,000 a pound. Wild simulated, we'll talk a bit about it, but basically you just scatter the seeds in the forest and come back 8 years later and harvest it. And because they're being grown under wild-like conditions, they can be worth upwards of the same price of the wild collected. Woods cultivated, that's what we have done a lot of it at the McDaniel's Nut Grove, where we do a lot of our research. Woods cultivated, you basically have a wooden frame, a raised bed, and you grow them there, and you may do more or less horticulturally intensive things like fertilizer, like pesticides, and weeding and so forth. Whereas in wild simulated, you don't do anything. You just let it grow. And then artificial shade. This is grown in vast quantities in Canada and Oregon. They have raised beds that you can see on the lower right. There is a shade structure there, and there are raised beds where the ginseng is planted very, very densely. And because of that dense planting, they have to use a lot of fungicides and so forth, and it's really an intensive operation. And yet, they have to spend money on that shade structure, and it can be very, very expensive. And yet, after all that expense in growing the crop, they're only going to get about $30 a pound. You can see the difference here in the, on the right side above that artificial shade line. Those are ginseng grown under artificial shade conditions, and they look like carrots, which is not very interesting, not of very much interest to the buyers, the mostly Asian buyers. Whereas the root there on the far left, above the word wild, that looks sort of like a person, right? And that makes it very, very attractive. Yeah, I forgot to rogue out those slides there. Now, this is a friend of mine, Bruce Fetter. He has been growing ginseng for over 30 years, using both the wild simulated and the woods cultivated methods. He makes money off of ginseng in various different ways. He'll harvest and sell wild ginseng or wild simulated. He will grow in the raised beds cultivated ginseng for $300 to $600 a pound, and then he will keep some of the plants going year after year to produce seeds, which you can sell for $150 a pound. Rootlets, that is to say, a 2-year-old plant, 1 to 2 year old plant, can be sold for $1 or $2 a piece. Excuse me just a minute. My cat was going bonkers there. I just let him out. Okay. Here on the lower left, on the bottom left, is an amazing ginseng root. It's about 30 years old. Most growers won't carry them that far, but Bruce tries various and different things, and it's extremely valuable. It's probably more than $1,000 for that single root. And the thing is, ginseng, the more it looks like a person, the more valuable it is, especially if it's anatomically correct. The thing is here, it has been in the ground for a long, long period of time, and it's developed this perfect man-like form. The Chinese word for ginseng is ren shen, which translates to man root, and so the more manly or it looks, the better. Bruce has made a lot of money off of ginseng, and he built the most amazing house I've ever seen out of his profits, and he's a good craftsman. And then this is just happens to be a stained glass window that he has in his one of his windows. Well, okay, I showed you a smaller version of this picture on the left. That's Bob Beifus. He's quite a guy. He's written a number of pamphlets and given many, many talks about ginseng and other things. And you can tell he's really, really into it because of that tattoo on his bicep. He also works out, I think, to have a bicep like that. He's asking the question, is my land suitable for ginseng? Like I said before, if someone approaches me, can I grow ginseng? I'll say, is your land really suitable for growing ginseng? Bob developed what he calls a VSA, or Visual Site Assessment tool, which you can get access to. It helps prospective ginseng growers evaluate their woodlands for growing ginseng. He based it on many, many years of observation of the ecology of wild ginseng. And points are awarded in this tool. It comes in printed form or online. Points are awarded for each of these categories. The dominant tree species, maple is absolutely the best, and there are some other deciduous hardwoods are pretty good. Exposure, it's extremely important with ginseng to grow it on the northeast facing slope, where it only gets morning sun, not afternoon sun, so it tends to be cooler and moister. that's a definite requirement for growing ginseng, north-northeast exposure. Slope, a hill is useful mostly because it improves the drainage of the soil, and the hillier you get, the more difficult it is to access, but some measure of hill is important. Soil characteristics, a loamy soil that's well drained, and an herbaceous understory, that is the indicator plants. If you go out in the woods and you want to decide, is this spot good for growing ginseng, you start looking for black cohosh, rattlesnake fern, maidenhair fern, and a number of others. And these are indicators that the soil is well, and the plant will be well adapted to that soil, and so forth. And finally, security. Poaching, as I mentioned before, is a serious problem with ginseng. So you're better off to keep your ginseng patch relatively close to your domicile, and you'd be better off to get a vicious guard dog as well, because that can be a big help. Now, I mentioned the wild simulated method of cultivating ginseng, and this is really my favorite. It's highly sustainable. You can see on the lower right there is a picture of forest, and I don't know if this is Bruce's or somebody else's, but start out just by scattering seed here over the area. It comes up in year one just as a seedling, a very small seedling. By the third year, it is getting considerable size. It may be flowering at that year, but it usually wait until fourth or fifth year. And by this time, the 5-year-old plants are flowering and producing seeds. The seeds are dropping to the ground, and they're germinating. So there you have the next crop coming along. And after 8 to 9 years, it's a very large plant. It's got a very substantial root by this time, and you might consider harvesting some of them at this point. But they're also producing seeds, and that second generation is now growing to the point where it is producing its own seed and producing seedlings from there. So this is a sustainable production system. We have one at Cornell where it was initiated about 15 years ago just by scattering seeds and roughing up the ground, but you don't use a plow or anything like that. And I take my class out there every year, and we harvest a couple hundred plants, but at the same time, those previous plants are growing on, and the population keeps growing. And even though we harvest it and some other people harvest it, it's outgrowing what we can take away. So that's what you call sustainability. It's a really nice system. And like I said, these wild simulated roots are very valuable. Goldenseal is another one that's of interest, certainly. There's a market for it. The question is it worth growing? There's the root there in the upper right. Is it worth growing? Mike Jacobson, Penn State, did a study for his PhD where he looked at the economics of cultivating goldenseal, ginseng, and about 10 other herbs. And he found that the only one that was really profitable, if you do it right, was ginseng. Goldenseal was kind of iffy. If you did it, if you know exactly what you're going to do, you can make some money off of it. It's worth about $40 to $60 a pound. But the others, the fairy root, fairy wand, the black cohosh and blue cohosh and so forth, you just can't make any money because the buyers will only pay $3 or $4 a pound. It doesn't matter whether it's harvested from the woods or from your garden. And at that price, $3 or $4 a pound, you're just not going to make much money. You might as well be harvesting from the woods, if at all. So really, most of these medicinal herbs in North America aren't worth growing economically speaking, but there's still a lot of demand for them. And as populations get smaller, harvesting pressure gets greater, it may become a point where it's going to be worth growing it. That's bloodroot and some seeds there. Now this is a fellow in West Virginia named Dave Carmen. He has a farm called Hopwood Farm, and he specializes in growing planting stock. He's got ginseng there. He's got probably all these herbs, but he doesn't grow them to harvest the root or the leaf or whatever. He grows them to a size where he can sell that plant to somebody else so they can grow it on. When I walked into his garden, I thought, oh, what a mess, you know, because it looked like a weed patch, all different sorts of things growing in there. But actually, he knew exactly what was in there. This close-up here of about 1 meter by 1 meter had 8 or 10 different species that have medicinal value and are worth something today. He's growing fairy wand here. I don't know if you're familiar with that plant, but here it is in the upper left. Beautiful. Starts seedlings. He starts, after about 3 years, he transplants those seedlings to a raised bed here. And then after 6 years, he is transplanting them into the field, into, they're not raised beds, they're sort of terraced slopes. And he is making his money off of selling those propagules. Here he's got a several-year-old seedling that he's bagged up with a root system. He's going to sell it. Collection of seeds is a good way. And what's this little mesh bag there for? The seeds, if they ripen from ginseng and a number of other crops like fairy wand, they'll just drop to the ground. And if you have 50 seeds laying on the ground, it's going to be very difficult to pick them up, right? So by enclosing them in that mesh bag, no problem. Here is dried root. That's not a propagule per se. He's going to sell that to someone for medicinal, but it's another product that he produces. This is Dave's farm as well. He's growing ginseng there. These are some beauties. And my point was, as I made before, you can grow ornamentals. You can grow medicinals as ornamentals. This is Dave Corman's farm, where he grows lots of the things I've already mentioned, the black cohosh and the trilliums and so forth. But he's growing ginseng as an ornamental. He's growing lady slipper, yellow lady slipper, obviously as an ornamental. It's one of the beautiful flowers that I know of. And he can get really high prices for both of those. So, okay, so shall we then go to questions?
Yeah. So I can coordinate the questions. So there are a couple ways people can ask questions. I'm going to read from the chat box. I know some people have put their questions there, and then I'm also going to open up the Q&A mode. So. And so anyone who wants to ask the question into the mic can do that. And if you're on the phone, just dial *6 to ask your question. So I'm going to start by just reading from the chat box, and feel free to enter the Q&A thing or do the chat box. So the first question I've got is, can shiitake be grown on trembling aspen? We call it white poplar here, and it's abundant. Otherwise, we have some white oak, green ash, and birch.
Okay, as far as the aspen, what was the first one?
Can shiitake be grown on trembling aspen?
Trembling aspen. Absolutely not. Aspen is a very soft wood, high in cellulose, low in lignin, and it doesn't support shiitake very well at all. I heard oak there, excellent substrate, and you see it is high in lignin. and it's low in cellulose. And so what the shiitake fungus is eating is lignin. And so a tree like oak with a lot of lignin, they grow very well on. A tree like aspen with very little lignin and mostly cellulose, they don't grow well on. The others on the list there, please?
Yeah. So the next question is, what are the coldest winter temperatures that lion's mane and shiitake can survive on logs?
Oh, by the way, I'm just going to back up a little bit. So you mentioned, ash. I wanted to point out that ash, unfortunately, is a very poor substrate for shiitake. I don't know why. We've tried it. You know, all of this ash is dying, and out in the Midwest, so much is dying as a result of the emerald ash borer, but ash is just not a good substrate. Okay, I'm sorry, could you repeat the second question again, please?
Yeah. So what are the coldest winter temperatures that lion's mane and shiitake can survive on logs?
I have never known either one of those to be injured by cold. In New York, we've had -10 to -20, no problem. And I mentioned before the field and forest mushroom outfit in Pesto, Wisconsin. Gets very cold up there. And they grow mushrooms every year, large quantities, and they've never had cold injury. So I guess what I'm saying is cold injury is not a problem with these things, unless you're above the Arctic Circle, maybe.
All right, great. And then another question we have is someone wants you to speak a little bit more about wood chip method for the substrate of mushrooms. What would be the best setup to integrate wood chip-based substrates into an agroforestry production?
Well, the Stropharia grows on wood chips, as I said. It can be a mixture of fresh wood chips and aged wood chips. It should be hardwood rather than conifer or rather than evergreen. You plant it here, let's say, in 2 meters by 2 meters, and next year you find over there's another patch, and over there's another patch. It really moves around. Once it's established, it does especially well, and you don't have to worry too much about it, except to maybe rogue it out when you want to use a particular piece of land for something else. So I hope it answers that question. Let me know if it doesn't. Next.
All right. Let's see. I'm just going to double check. Any more questions? I think I got all of them in the chat box. Yeah, if anyone has any more questions, feel free to post them in the chat box or enter the Q&A. Oh, I did miss one. Okay, sorry, Tim. Okay, so Tam said for totems, for totems, I've seen and tried plastic bags and paper yard waste bags to prevent evaporation. Not entirely happy with either, and not sure when to remove for light and oxygen.
The way we started out doing it was we made the stack itself, put down one log vertically, cover it with spawn, second log goes on top of that, another layer of spawn, and a third log on top of that. Then we would cover with one of those paper lawn bags, and then cover with the plastic bags. We found out pretty quickly that the plastic bags really weren't necessary. And by the way, when we set out those plastic bags, we're using black plastic, I believe, all over half an acre or so of the woods. There was a road not too far away, and people would complain, look at all those garbage bags out there in the woods. So it's better as far as using the paper bags. The paper bag, you don't have to worry about removing it. usually by the end of the first growing season. It has rained on it and so forth, and it's beginning to deteriorate and fall off, and by the next year it will be gone. What it does is increase the humidity inside that space, which is important for the growth of the mushroom. Other than that, I don't know of any innovations as far as growing totem stacks is concerned. I'd be interested. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, Tim had another question, but I don't want to cut you off.
No, I'm done.
Okay. And so another question Tim had was, so he's not forest gardening, but he's tried oyster in winter on coffee grounds and has had major problems with fungus gnats, which I understand can be a pest outside too. So they're wondering what treatments to use for the fungus gnats without harming the mycelium.
I have never grown oysters indoors, and honestly, I can't answer that question. I don't know.
Okay. And then, let's see. Oh yeah, Andre had a follow-up question about the wood chip, inoculating wood chips for mushrooms.
Yeah.
And he's asking what the best way to get spawn is for that when you're inoculating wood chips.
There are a number of companies that you can find online that sell spawn, various different strains of various different fungi. Most of them have a rather limited selection of Shiitake strains and maybe one lion's mane strain and so forth. I hate to promote a particular vendor over another, but Field and Forest Products, Google that, have an amazing array of Shiitake strains. You saw that list there. There might have been 20 of them. And they go out to Japan every year and they bring back new strains because that's where these strains are developed. They also have other species like lion's mane, Namiko, oyster, and so forth. So basically, you buy your own. You buy spawn. It requires laboratory conditions to grow it, and most folks don't have that. If they do, and they know how to use a lab, that would be fine to grow your own spawn, but it's much more efficient, I think, just to buy a 5-pound bag of sawdust spawn for $25. It will inoculate 30 logs, so you're paying less than $1 per spawn, per log, less than $1 per log, and that's pretty inexpensive.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Good deal. And then we have one more question. And so the question is from Neil: are there mushroom species that can grow on white poplar logs? I know you said that they have a really soft wood.
Yeah.
And this is also the same, the tribling aspen tree.
Yes, absolutely. Oyster mushrooms grow extremely well on high cellulose wood, soft woods like poplar and willow and some others. The soft hardwoods.
Okay, great. Oh, we got another question. Thank you, Ken, for answering all these questions, and thank you, everyone, for great questions. So this is from Annette. If I grow ginseng in an area and cannot grow more ginseng there, can I grow mushrooms there? I'm guessing this is about space and trying to figure out how to plan the particular things you grow.
Yeah, the allelopathy that, okay, back up and say that ginseng, a disadvantage of ginseng, by the way, is if you have a patch and you harvest it, you can't plant ginseng back to the same space. Probably because of an accumulation of fungi and bacteria. That's why large-scale growers in Canada will fumigate the bed, and that eliminates those. But yeah, let's see, you said ginseng and the other crop?
Mushrooms. So
Mushrooms, yes, you could plant those right in there. Now, if you're growing on bolts, those 3-foot logs, they're not subject to anything in the soil, particularly if you raise them off the soil by using 2 extra logs. So they're divorced from the soil conditions. It doesn't matter basically what's in the soil. But even if you put them on the ground, they would still grow and not be inhibited by the older ginseng.
All right, sweet. And then Andre was just wondering if, and this is usually a question I ask speakers in general, but would you be willing to share your slides with everyone who's participated?
Yeah, sure, I'd be happy to.
Okay, so I'll just I'll take the slides that you sent me and I'll send it up in the follow-up email I usually send.
Okay, that'd be good.
All right. Do we have any more questions, anyone? If not, we'll go ahead and close it up for the night. Okay, sweet. Well, thank you so much, Ken, for that talk. Everyone's really excited about mushrooms. I love mushrooms and I love medicinal plants, and trying to figure out ways to make a sustainable business off of those is really important. So everyone's giving a shout out and saying thank you. So thank you for your time and leading this talk, and it's been really cool to work with you.
Well, you're welcome, and I enjoyed meeting you all, even if I couldn't see you, but you couldn't see me either.
Yeah,
but it's always nice to talk to people that are interested in forest farming.